I would start with, there is the most popular anecdote now or joke in Russia. I want to share that with you. They say that life is similar to a zebra, sometimes a black stripe, sometimes a white one. Remember the COVID, unemployment, rising prices, political repression. So it was the white stripe. That's where we are now. The war is lost by Russia. That's clear absolutely for everybody who is not sort of, radiated by the Russian propaganda. And there is no doubt about that. Russian forces have failed to achieve the original goal that was put forward by the leadership of Russia of swiftly taking Kiev along with other major cities and deposing the Ukrainian government, because the idea of deposing Zelensky was even publicly mentioned by Putin. While Moscow's ground advance on the Ukrainian capital appeared largely stalled today, and even today I've heard that roughly 15 kilometers the Russian troops will push out of the outskirts of Kiev on the right bank of the Dnieper River. But just after that, Putin, he made a face-saving speech at the large, very large, let me say, rally in Moscow. It was totally artificial and staged, but he was just saying that operation was unfolding successfully in strict accordance with pre-approved plans. Well, in reality, failing to capture Kiev, Putin has decided to change the tactics now, and he switched to a kind of a plan B, holding the position he has already taken, and that's very, very small regions, no single city, except some villages, etc., were already taken. In addition, Russia, of course, is seeking now to break a corridor between Crimea and the occupied Donbass in order to expand Russian control over Donbass and to have the land communication with Donbass. And that's also important to open some water sources for Crimea, which lacks water. So this was one of the goals. And of course, also, if Russia will succeed with this, it will try to force Kiev to accept its terms. And I would say that if Russian troops gain any advantage before the negotiations, they might go on the offensive again. The damage Putin has managed to do to Russia's economy, which in fact, by and large, was doing not too badly, is something few people have managed to do to their country in such a short period of time. I do not remember any precedent. It's like, shooting oneself in the legs, in both legs, at point blank range with a large caliber machine gun. That's what was done now. Putin made, I would say, 4 mistakes in deciding to launch this military invasion. The mistake was the perception, first mistake, that the West was too soft to resist the aggression, that it was lethargic, that it was greedy and divided, and even it looked, maybe it looked so before, but the aggression reconsolidated the West unprecedentedly. If you look at the sanctions now, I haven't seen anything like that before. Iran, there was divisions between Europe and the United States in applying the sanctions, and etc. Now the European Union has begun to prepare a complete rejection of purchases of Russian oil. For Russia, that will mean immediately a loss of about $100 billion a year immediately. Later, the loss of all European markets forever, because Russia will not be able to return or to restore these markets. Firstly, they will not be needing oil and gas forever, given the current trends with the renewable energy. And secondly, we do not know when the sanctions will be taken away. Second mistake was to think that the Russian economy was self-sufficient and it could be successfully functioning, insulated from the world. Well, Russia has become the most sub-sanctioned country in the world, worse than Iran or North Korea. Since the beginning of the war, Russia has received over 2,700 sanctions. I don't remember the exact figures, but roughly like that, bringing the number to more than 5,000 sanctions today. You know what is the first place? Which country runs the first in sanctioning? Switzerland. Over 550 sanctions were imposed by Switzerland. United States, by the way, have imposed 240 something, but of course it's heavy caliber sanctions, and the most damage to Russian economy is done by this. The third mistake was the mistake to overestimate, and I would say grossly overestimate, the efficiency of the Russian army. According to very conservative US intelligence estimates, I've read that today, more than 7,000 Russian troops have died in Ukraine already, just since the war has started 3 weeks ago. And according to some leaks from the Kremlin, around 15,000. If you add the PMCs, private military companies, to that amount. And that is greater than the number of American troops killed over 20 years in Iraq and Afghanistan combined. It's unprecedented. It is a staggering number with implications for the combat effectiveness, of course, of Russian troops. Military experts generally claim that a 10% casualty rate, including dead and wounded, for a single unit renders it unable to carry out combat-related tasks. Today, practically 90% of the units, Russian units, are much higher than 30% of casualty rates. So it's also amazing. And the main mistake was the impression that Ukraine was a failed state and Ukrainians were not a real nation. When I watch today what's going on, I see the overwhelming motivation for Ukraine. Mariupol, it's a city just on the Azov Sea, and it is just on the way from the Crimea to Donbass, and that's why it's a very important strategical aim for Russia. So it is surrounded and almost wiped off the face of the earth by constant shelling, airstrikes, and there are, I read, roughly 3 or 4 buildings in the city of 600,000 that are still not damaged, just 3 or 4 buildings. Of the rest, Nazis did something similar to Guernica, Stalingrad, Coventry. And I do not know any other precedents of the destruction of the civil population on that scale. But the defenders continued to fight back and just shocked with this surprise. The Russian minister, by the way, the Russian Ministry of Defense just yesterday sent an 8-page statement to Ukraine official with an ultimatum to surrender Mariupol, with all the threats and everything. The answer came already this morning at 5 o'clock in the morning. And it contained what I would describe as a 4-letter word. That's it. The city is cut off from everything. There is no cell network, no electricity, no heat. There is no food or water. Civilians are torn to pieces by shells and bombs. It is even not possible to estimate the casualties right now. I know nobody wants to hear or to think about it, but I just say, I would invite you to say it out loud. At this moment, children are dying because they have no water to drink. Can you just, digest that? It is it is really a patriotic war for Ukraine. And it is impossible to win over the people that are ready to pay any price for their freedom and independence. They are fighting with complete contempt for fear of death. I remember Pushkin at the beginning of the 19th century wrote about this feeling of self-denial. He said, there is a rupture in a battle, bliss upon the brink of the abyss. This is, the feeling that turns massively the ordinary people into heroes. And when I see Zelensky, I feel proud for human race that leaders of this caliber still exist. Maybe if you would be interested, I can say a couple of words about why this happened, why this, dramatic failure of the Russian army, which was considered, if not the first, then the second in the world. In fact, that is a very prosaic story, in fact. And anybody who has ever worked for any analytical body that is or was servicing the decision makers will recognize the situation, definitely. I remember it myself. I've been in this situation many times. For this particular case, suppose you work in the administration of the president. He has a dozen of aides, 2 dozens of advisors, and you are getting used that occasionally you get the tasks that make you feel dumbfounded. You get a task, in this particular case, I imagine that. They got a task to prepare a foreign policy contingency plan aiming to enhance Russia's strategic position vis-à-vis NATO. You get the principal parameters with a possible escalation ladder, let me say. You get, when you read it, you noticed that it goes up to a kind of a kinetic conflict somewhere at the top of the ladder. And obviously, you just raise your brows and you ask those who brought this task, what do you mean? Can you clarify this? Where? Between whom? On which initiative? You need to know to analyze to predict the situation. But because of the total secrecy, and of course they didn't want to release that this is a possibility, they simply dismissively say, oh, this is just, a close to zero probability. In order to avoid the big guys questioning us why this contingency was ignored. And certainly we do not expect anything unless Russia is attacked. This is what I imagine. And you know very well that Russia will never be attacked. And then you conclude that the report is prepared just for a tick. And that means that it should be written in an upbeat, triumphant style, so that there will be no question as to why you list so many obstacles, thus raising doubts about your political reliability. In general, you write a report that if a conflict erupts, we have everything in place. To eliminate the consequences, we are good and all is well. And that what was probably fed to the top echelons. And you concentrate on the tasks that are real. You know, your staff is exhausted. It has been working day and night, overstretched, and you simply cannot afford assigning some imagined contingencies to them. And then all of a sudden, you read in the news that they really crossed the border and the hell opens up. As the top guys expect that everything will be copacetic according to your analytics, which were written out of the blue. That's technical side. I don't know who came up with this Ukrainian blitzkrieg idea, but I know for sure that if the experts received the real input, they might have at least indicated that the plan is controversial, that there is a lot of things to double check, a lot of things. And now Russia got in shit somewhere up to the neck. And it's not clear what to do. The Kremlin no longer knows how to explain what is happening. After all, during these days, they buried more soldiers, the borders of which were returned to Russian regions, than they recognized their losses officially. Lies no longer help, but the truth terrifies them. Confusion and despair rules now in Kremlin. Putin's recent hysterical statements are not what the population and even officials want to hear, since now their main goal is to survive. All these threatening speeches are not directed at anyone at all. Putin is furious simply because he is caught between the two wars that he cannot control, the war with Ukraine and the war of sanctions with the West. These wars, they have different logic, they have different pace, they have different horizons, they have different risks and threats. Anyone would get lost here. So Putin just talks nonsense now. His last speech, which I already mentioned, at this phony rally meeting in his support, which was broadcast nationally, it was even interrupted at some point on the justification that there were server error, but those who control that, they understood that it's bullshit. Anyway, of course, the scapegoats, as always, will be nominated that already are being selected. And according to what I know, there were several leaks in media. The general from the Federal Security Service, Sergei Beseda, probably you read about that, the head of the 5th Department, and his deputy, also a general, were placed under the home arrest. The official name of this department is the Operational Information and International Relations Service, which oversees relations with foreign partners of the Federal Security Service, but it was also given the role to collect the information because they still have some agents around Ukraine. So this story goes in tandem with another story from last week, which claims that Putin fired at least 8 generals involved in a special operations in Ukraine. And only recently, the deputy commander of the Russian Guards troops was also dismissed. So that's what is going on. And of course, in addition to that, the fog of war, plus all permitting corruption in addition. Just imagine how many lavish cuts from the budget could be now justified by the war. Sergei Shoigu, the Minister of Defense, over the years of managing Russian military ministry, became a dollar multimillionaire, having plundered more money from the budget than any war minister in the history of mankind. And here we get a very interesting and potentially dangerous situation. Putin turned out to be completely wrong. And whatever he says now, despite of the propaganda, his generals, his governors, his ministers will know that he has lost the war. The economy is collapsing before the eyes of the citizens because of the war and the sanctions. There are no reserves, no money. A real exodus of intellectuals and experts who can do at least something has begun from Russia. During these weeks, more than 1 million Russians fled the country. And the big question is, how will the middle level of the federal security service and the army will be reacting to being accused of an invasion that they were probably not happy to participate in, and obviously were misled while they were providing their assessments. Let us recall the history of Argentina junta. It kept the country in fear for several years. At some point, the leader of the junta, Galtieri, decided to arrange a small victorious war and thus raise his popularity. He didn't expect that the capture of the Falklands would lead to harsh sanctions and a military response from Britain. As a result of the lost war, the junta lost power, and its leaders were convicted and received terms of up to life imprisonment. I think that is something which already Putin is seeing in his dreams, in his nightmares. And I think that probably he does know about Falklands, but in any case, he could, I assume that he read the general history, but he can read what happened. Everything has led to the collapse of the regime. Maybe lengthy, but today everything works much faster. So frankly, if you ask me what I expect, I would say maybe it's a wishful thinking, but judging on what's going on now inside the country, I think that Putin will not be able to remain in power until the end of this year.
To think that he thought that it would be successful, to me, is astonishing.
Because he has been in power too long. He came to power in 2000. So he was in power 21 years, either as the president or for 4 years between the different terms as the prime minister, but still in power. And certainly during that period of time, he has started to live in a kind of the balloon environment, artificial environment, where all the information was fed in by the security services in special folders every day. And people around him, normal bureaucrats, they realized at a certain point, because Putin was not getting younger, he was getting older. With age comes certain, belief in his infallibility. And when people brought something contradictory to what he expected to read, they were fired or downgraded or whatever. Gradually, that taught the people that they should provide only pleasant information for the boss. And he was fed, living in this balloon for 20 years. You will get used to that. Anybody will get used to that. And in addition, he lived in seclusion. And I wouldn't exclude that occasionally he was turning on the television set and he was listening what his propaganda was feeding into the people. And of course, he started to believe that this is the exact reality. So he actually has become also the victim of his own propaganda. But basically, the basic layer of that, I know a little bit how he came to power and everything. He was a very simple, rough guy from St. Petersburg streets. And when he came to power, and it was practically by chance, he was selected by Yeltsin. Before being nominated as a successor to Yeltsin, who resigned, he has never gone through any electoral campaign, never. He was always appointed. After he came in power, the election were turned into mockery, and he has never been elected afterwards as well. And clearly, that also contributed to this, he's very mediocre in terms of his intellect. That's my personal feeling, which based on my personal experience. But when he is raised to such heights, every person will start to believe that he is a genius. And that's what happened. We have a very important situation, and I wanted to mention that when I was thinking about our discussion. I perfectly understand very well why the United States and European allies do not want to close the skies over Ukraine, though Zelensky has been pleading for in every his speech. And though, of course, the anti-air defenses has become much better now in Ukraine, still, recently there were the use of even the thermobaric bombs in Ukraine, which is the atrocity and which is considered to be a war crime. But as long as the skies are open, that will be possible. I know that, of course, it's very risky, but each time I'm thinking about that, I recall something which I read when I was still a student, and it just, carved in my mind. It was Marcus Aurelius who said, if you don't take risk, most probably you will have to take 100-fold times bigger risk in the future. I think Putin wants, and according to what I know, he even enthusiastically, when he heard that Zelensky wants to have a ceasefire, he responded to that very positively because he needs, a lay off in this situation. But for him, it will be just an interruption in order to regroup forces. And that will mean that the second act of the war, sooner or later, will come back and will be activated. For him, the war has not finished. And I would say that even now, I'm thinking in terms of, okay, what he can show to the people and boast as a victory, let me say. And unfortunately, I don't want to be a prophet, but I think that as long as the tanks are there and to the west of Kiev, there will be always a possibility that there might be some attack on Moldavia. And then, of course, and Moldavia is a tiny country, and obviously it can be captured quite quickly, and that will give him the justification. Okay, we keep still Crimea. We have got the water from the continental Ukraine to bring to Crimea. We have supported Donbass. We have, achieved the goals of the operation. But in reality, that will be only the interruption. And I think that Ukrainians understand that very well. When I read today that Zelensky said that in his judgment, there is no basis for the agreement now, I think he understands that only more dramatic failure, visible for everybody, will guarantee that there will be no continuation. I would say that very soon we will see the results, because people usually start to feel the reality by their, let me say, stomach. Today, there are already lots of problems. Today in Moscow, there are shortages in the grocery with sugar. There is no sugar. There is no from what it could be done, and there is no sugar now. And gradually that will be felt by many people. And in addition, no planes, because I would say 80% of the planes were not owned by Russia. They were leased. And now leasing companies, they simply stopped any supply of the spare parts for these planes. So in a matter of couple of months, they will be just on terrain. Though they have nationalized and used them for the time being to fly inside Russia. But in a couple of months, they will need the spare parts. Okay, they will start to take the spare parts from one plane and put it on another as the new one, but you can imagine what will be the security of these aviation. People understand that very well. Well, many things are happening now. I don't want to go into the details, but I'm practically sure that in about a month, the people will feel on their skin the results of what has happened so far.